And then after that, we're going to have a session of question and answers, which by that stage, hopefully some of the speakers will have returned from coffee, and otherwise I'll be making up the answers, which is probably not a good idea. So first off, let's start with a presentation on the fiscal terms, and this will be done by Dr. Van Meurs. And Dr. Van Meurs has been working as a consultant with the, please come on up, with the Somalis to look at the fiscal regime, to present a fiscal regime that is both fair to the exploration company, to the investor, but also brings substantial rewards to the Somalian nation and to the Somalian people. And so, Dr. Van Meurs.
Thank you so much. It is a great pleasure to be here. And after spending a wonderful time in Mogadishu, I can tell you Somalia is not just good for oil and gas, it is also very good for solar energy. And it is a wonderful climate. So, but I will restrict myself to oil and gas. Of course, what we're trying to do is to achieve the maximum benefit from the development of all the resources that are in the offshore. You will get an extensive presentation on the various blocks. As an economist, I expect some of the blocks to have maybe big oil fields, other maybe smaller oil fields, maybe some have gas. So that means we try to design the fiscal terms in such a way that there is an incentive to develop every block that you may have in, that may have to be presented in the common presentation. Generally, what is important is to settle the overall share of the companies, the so-called government take, which is the share of the project profits that Somalia, the minimum share that Somalia is planning to receive is somewhere between 54 and 66%, as you can see. So consequently, that is the overall concept. As you can see, the fiscal terms are targeted well below the current rather tough terms in Kenya, in Mozambique, in Tanzania, and consequently what we try to do is we realize that Somalia is now a frontier area. Of course, in the other three countries, large resources have already been discovered, largely gas resources. We hope it will be oil in Somalia. However, we need to realize that we are a frontier area compared to the other three areas, and consequently we try to attract investment by offering actually more attractive terms. Of course, we did an overall worldwide analysis comparing the terms with other bid rounds, other countries that have been having bid rounds over the last few years. Lebanon had a successful bid round, we looked at that. Indonesia had a very unsuccessful bid round, and that was also a very important benchmark for us. So we know what worked, we know what didn't work over the last 2-3 years, and consequently that is how we designed the terms. We designed the terms in a modest way so that if the field is bigger, the oil price is higher, and the costs are less, that Somalia gets more. So that means the government take is progressive. That means the more attractive resource, the more Somalia will get in terms of fiscal revenues. That also means the less attractive resource, the less Somalia will get. So consequently, we try to design a fiscal system that applies to a wide range of conditions. Here you see the so-called government take for a number of countries. The big red line are the terms in Somalia. What you see here is the government take in percent. as you can see, and here you see field sizes from 20 million, that will be a challenge, all the way up to 2 billion. And what you can see, the share that Somalia will get will gradually go up as the fields become bigger and bigger. So that is the overall design. As you can see, the terms are far more attractive than the current producing East African countries. For instance, here is the government take of Mozambique, for instance, and we are well below Mozambique, and Mozambique is actually the most favorable term in East Africa. So consequently, there you see very competitive. We looked at, as I said, we looked at Lebanon. We are very competitive as Lebanon. We're well below Indonesia. Indonesia had a failed bid round, so we like to make sure that we're well below those terms. We are kind of equal, as you can see, to the more moderate terms in Ghana. So this is the overall government take. This is the undiscounted government take, as it is called. Of course, for investors, it is not just the government take that is important. What counts is the profitability. What counts is the risk profitability. So what we do, or what I do in my firm, I also rate the fiscal systems. My firm actually regularly rates all the fiscal systems in the world, from the most attractive to a government which is number 1 to the least attractive, that is number 100. And then we actually classify more than 768 fiscal systems in this world. I rate Somalia, the minimum terms that are being offered, as rating 58 out of 100. So a little bit tougher than the average of the 50. So consequently, as you can see, East African terms are rated far tougher. I also listed some other, the US, Gulf of Mexico, of course, list more attractive. So here you see the overall rating of Somalia. In the Van Nurse rating, I rated 58 out of 100. How did we balance the fiscal terms? We talked about the overall level, the overall burden. How did we spread this burden? What you're going to find very attractive in the terms from an investor point of view, contrary to almost most African nations, in the very first bid round, we won't have a carried interest for the national oil company, despite the fact that the legislation provides for the possibility of a national oil company. So we have no carried interest. That is always quite a headache sometimes, having a carried partner with no money, and consequently you will not be faced with that burden. Somalia realizes that really they need to collect revenues, substantial revenues first, before they can play themselves in the oil business. Another very attractive feature of the terms is that production sharing is very attractive, very modest compared to most countries in the world. Where the system is a little bit on the tougher side is where it really counts for Somalia. Royalties are substantive, and then training obligations are very substantive, and social obligations. As we heard, Somalia is just starting out, and if oil and gas is found, the training requirements are immense, and consequently we have put great emphasis on training obligations. So there is also substantive administration fees compared to some other nations, because Somalia has, at this point in time, not the funds really to administer otherwise a very large offshore. We realize that it may take 10 years before you actually start to see production. And in that 10-year period, Somalia has to have the funds to properly administer the exploration and the possible development of the various oil fields. Let's look a little bit at the details. There will be signature bonuses. $2 million is contemplated. There may be a higher bonus for some of the better fields. The training obligations, as I said, are $500,000 per year, and the same is for social obligations. That will, as soon as the first discoveries are made, will put Somalia in a strong position to start training their people for the oil industry. The royalties are based on sliding scales, based on the daily production and based on price. That means, as I already showed, the bigger the field, the royalty is done on a field by field basis. The bigger the field, the more royalties you pay. The smaller the field, the less royalties you pay. And that makes a wide range of fields economic. Here you see the range. The royalty ranges from 20,000 barrels a day to 200,000 barrels a day. It moves between 5% to 20%. Then there is, on top of that, a royalty based on price between 40 and 110, which moves from 0 to 15. You have to add the two numbers together. So if the oil price is $40 a barrel and you find a very small field, what are you in for? 5% royalty. That's it. That is very favorable compared to the royalties you pay in most other countries in the world. If it is a huge field and the oil price is $110 a barrel, then you're in for the 75% royalty. So consequently, the royalty automatically slides with those conditions. We realize that gas has to have far more attractive terms than oil, because gas, particularly these days, gas will be difficult to sell as LNG. And many of the East African countries have seen big problems trying to sell their LNG. And consequently, if gas is being found, the fiscal terms have to be more attractive than for oil to create the possibility of LNG projects. And consequently, that is also part of the puzzle. As you can see, the rates for gas are less than for oil. As you can see, the corporate income tax is 30%. The corporate income tax floats with the generally applicable but non-discriminatory rates. Then we get to the truly attractive part. For oil and gas, the cost limit is 70%. That is somewhat on the high side these days for very attractive areas. But then the profit oil share to government is from 10 to 30%. So that, based on an R factor, as you can see, that is a very attractive production sharing arrangement. Now, it is precisely this 10 to 30% that will be the only bit variable. So, as Engineer Carrar already explained, we want to have a very transparent bid process. And that means whoever bids the highest increase to the 10 to 30% range is the winner. That's it. You sign the contract that has been discussed for 5 months with the various oil companies, and then the winner will get the block. It is that simple, a very simple bid system. The R factor ranges from 1 to 3 based on cumulative inflows for the contractor relative to cumulative outflows. What does it mean in real terms? Now, as I said, the larger the field and the higher the price, and the lower the cost with the R factor, the total government take goes up. However, Somalia has shied away from this typical creaming off of profits. We realize that if you go to a frontier area, there has to be upside. There has to be upside, otherwise, why bother? And consequently, that is what we offer in the overall terms. And that is what you see actually here. this is how the pie is divided, how the oil is split in terms of cost and profit. If you have a small field, 200 million barrels actually in many parts of the world wouldn't be called a small field, but I understand that in Somalia there are even bigger opportunities than that. And if the oil price is $60 and the cost of $20, now the oil company picks up 29% of the total barrel, and here is the split from the government. If the field is large and the cost is much lower and the price is much higher, as you see, the share of the government, the share of the contractor still goes up. The percentage of the contractor still goes up. That means there is upside. And that is a very important part of the design of the fiscal system. We know that the most attractive aspect of Somalia, after you have reviewed the geology, will be the possible upside that this country can deliver. Not too many countries around the world offer attractive upside anymore. Somalia will do that. So consequently, that is what you see here. Somalia realizes that fiscal stability is important. Somalia has honored the deals from the past and consequently intends to honor the deals in the future. And consequently, we have a fiscal stability provision in the agreement, as Engineer Karar indicated, for a period of about from today really until September. Everybody can comment on the model contract, provided you pay your participation fee first of $50,000, but then you can speak and then you can comment to the government. And so what we'd like to do is for the next months engage with the possible investors to hear the reactions on the contract, to see how we can improve it, to see where there are contradictions that need to be resolved, until we have a perfect contract that we think includes all of the concern, and then we will freeze it, and then we go for the bids. And if you win, that's the contract you sign. A very, very transparent system. So there are certain small, generally applicable taxes, like property taxes and so on, which are relatively minor. What we propose is, provided nobody tries to put discriminatory taxes on you, but we propose that these small taxes are simply payable as they will appear from time to time. As I said, we have the single bid parameter, a very transparent bid process compared to most nations in the world, and consequently, if you like what you see in the geology, if you believe there is good geology, and if you make a good bid and you win, you can sign this contract. And consequently, you will be certain of getting the block. There will be no all kinds of negotiations afterwards. If you are the winner, you are the winner. And consequently, that is the bid process. With that, we hope that we offer not just good geology, but also good terms. And it is always the combination of good geology and good terms that attracts the investors. We hope to do that, and consequently we like to listen to you over the next 7 months and see your comments on the terms, and then the terms will be finalized, and then we are ready for bids. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And I would say, just to remind you that after the next presentation, there will be a chance for questions and answers. And if you have any specific questions to ask at that time, it would, if you can just hold on to or frame those questions just for a minute, and then we'll go forth in the Q&A. So thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Looks like we have a license round in Somalia. we have a chance to, an opportunity to access acreage that has never been accessed before. And it looks like if we are going to invest and hopefully make hydrocarbon discoveries, that they've put a lot of thought into trying to make sure that it's a fair investment and a return to the government. So, but I think as was discussed there, the chance of some feedback is always welcome. I've always found that the ministry are always willing to listen to ideas and to feedback, so I would encourage you to do that. So the next presentation, which is going to be given by my colleague Karina Rodriguez on the hydrocarbon prospectivity offshore Somalia, is the context behind this whole licence round. The licence round, as we've seen, is going to be fair, it's going to be transparent, it's going to be designed to be good for both the investor but also for the people of Somalia. It's all of those things, but it's nothing without oil in the ground. So what Karina is going to tell us about is the argument, or put the case for the fact that Somalia is rich in hydrocarbons, it's huge potential for oil. And I think, you know, for me, this is the nub of the matter. It's the most exciting part of the matter. So Karina, who's, as I say, my colleague at Spectrum, has had a career of 25 years working in super major oil companies, working for national oil companies, working on resource evaluation, identification, resource evaluation, and exploitation. So, you know, in the industry parlance, she knows her onions. And she's looked at Somalia and done a review of the various play types in Somalia, the types of trap for hydrocarbons, for oil and gas, mainly for oil, that you can find in Somalia. And she can tell us to some extent where these things are. And she'll also show us where the blocks available in around are. So this brings the whole of this morning's set of presentations together. So after Karina's presentation, as I say, we'll have a question and answer session, and then perhaps you could join us for networking and lunch after that. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Karina Rodriguez.
Thank you, Neil. And so with that, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. And I am very happy and very excited to be standing here to share with you our findings on the prospectivity offshore Somalia. And as Neil said, it was extremely exciting for us because, of course, we were looking at the first data that was coming out. And I was asked today, how long have you been looking at Somalia? And it was from the first brood stacks that were coming out of the boat. As soon as the brood stacks were coming out, we were looking at them and we were being amazed and puzzled by what we saw. But hopefully we came up with some answers. So I am sure that we have a room full of explorers and of course other disciplines as well. But for those of us who are explorers, and we've heard many times today mentioned that we are in a frontier basin. So I am sure the question that is burning inside of you, and if it's not, it really should be, is there a source rock? And I'm sure that's not the only question you're asking, because it's not only is there a source rock, but is this source rock, where is it? Is it widely distributed? What is its quality? Is it generating hydrocarbons? And of course, the last question, what type of hydrocarbon is it generating? And so because of that, we have spent a lot of time, not only in this frontier basin, but globally, because of course we have data in areas that are very frontier, but here we have spent a lot of time trying to de-risk this one critical element of the petroleum system. For that, we have carried out in 3 major steps. So we go back and we do our regional plate tectonic reconstruction, our paleogeographic reconstructions. Once we identify the right environment and the right setting for source rock deposition, we then go back to the seismic and we say, okay, we now know more or less the ages where we should be expecting source rock. Do we see anything that looks like source rock on the seismic? And then we do very detailed source rock characterization to try and de-risk it even more. Then, if we think we have a source rock, we should have hydrocarbon evidence. So let's look for slicks, let's look for DHIs. And so that's what I'm going to share with you. And for that, I'm going to take you right back to Permo-Triassic, to early Jurassic times, where you can see there a reconstruction using the EMAG version 1 data, and where we've got this, you can see where Somalia is back in those days, and we've got Gondwana just starting to rift, and we've got the Karoo deposition. So this is a really important time because we have the Karoo world-class source rock being deposited in this type of environment. And you can see there from our stratigraphic column that we have developed along Somalia based on the data and evaluation that we carried out, that we do expect source rocks, lacustran shales. Now those are always really good news because they are oil prone. So that's really good news. Then when we get to a little bit later in the lower to middle Jurassic, we'll have these thin rift restricted marine shales. So after this, what happens? Madagascar drifted down and it separates from Somalia along this Davy fracture zone. Then we see that during this time we still have some restricted conditions. So we are still depositing these thin rift restricted marine shales, but we also have some other considerations. We have these oceanic anoxic events. These are really important, and especially when you have restricted basins like we do here, they become even more important. So we have source rocks being deposited. That is great news. Can we see them on the seismic? And we will soon see if we can see them on the seismic. I stopped there because those are probably the key source rocks that we have, but we did this for all the source rocks throughout the stratigraphic column. We did our plate tectonic reconstruction, and we identified all these source rocks. So we have up to 6 different types of source rocks that could be generating hydrocarbons all along the margin. I already described those 2. We have the mid to upper Jurassic, which are equivalent to the Arundel Formation, proven in the Ogaden Basin. I will be discussing that particular source rock in quite a lot of detail because it shows up with really interesting characteristics on the seismic. I think you will be excited to see that. And then of course we can have lower Cretaceous and upper Cretaceous source rocks. So a lot of source rocks that could be working and generating hydrocarbons here offshore Somalia. So just to put you in context, these are geological basins. These are not related to states, and I will show a map at the end which shows the states and it shows all the prospectivity, how it's distributed along the states. But here we have 3 geological basins that have been named from north to south, the Obeah, Correol, and Jubalamo Basin, and they are based on gravity anomalies first, these low gravity anomalies, but of course we have confirmed them with our seismic because we can actually see these bases with our seismic. I'm going to start in the north. I'm going to start in the basins in the north. We have our beautiful seismic lines in the north, and this is actually a PSDM line, 190 kilometers. And one of the surprises that came in interpreting this data is that gravity modeling, because we integrated gravity, we integrated all the data that we had available, is predicting that we have a continental crust block that extends up to 200 kilometers offshore. So we have all those tilted fault blocks that we can see on our seismic to confirm what the gravity modeling is also telling us. And you see where we've marked S, that would be the Karoo source rock. So now I'm taking you to the pre-rift Permo-Triassic times that we've already identified. We have the right conditions for source rock deposition, and here, colored in brown, are where we expect to see the source rocks because we see those characteristics. If we move up the stratigraphic column, we've now drifted Madagascar away from Somalia, and we have this shallow marine restricted conditions, and so we would expect that in the Sindrift half gravens we would see the source rocks, and there you can see in that sort of browny color, orangey color, S for source rock, so a shallower source rock. So we're moving up the stratigraphic columns. We have identified 2 potential source rock sequences. What lies above these source rock sequences? We do have one well. We have integrated all the well data that we had in Somalia. This one well was drilled offshore, the Mereg-1 well. And what it does is it provides us some information that we do have carbonates up on the shelf. And when you take this carbonate sequence, you can see how this carbonate sequence continues into the outboard. And there where you see that red line, that is actually a carbonate buildup. But this is a dip line, so carbonate buildups are not very clear on dip lines. I'm going to show you the intersecting line so you can see how we actually came up with the conclusion that that was a carbonate buildup. This is the intersecting line, this is the strike line. Now you can see this really interesting, very, very extensive carbonate buildup complex that is just above the breakup on conformity. So the great news here is I have just shown you that we have a couple of source rock sequences, and we are very confident that those source rocks are going to be in place. And look at where the source rock sits, right below this carbonate complex. That is great news for that carbonate complex. I'm going to show you a bit more on that. I'm also going to show you the resource evaluation that we have carried on that particular carbonate complex. But you can also see that overlying it is this sort of opaque sequence, overlying that blue carbonate buildup. That is probably acting as a seal. We have the perfect play system here, and I will show you the resources associated with that and some of the de-risking that we have done, because you shouldn't blindly believe me that that is a carbonate buildup, but I will show you more evidence. And what happens outward of this carbonate? There is a very interesting sequence. If you follow that same sequence outward, you'll see this sort of low frequency, opaque sequence that we have interpreted as deep marine sapropels. We have proposed that those are deep marine sapropels. But this is a really big question. Is this a valid source rock? Do I have a way of convincing you that this is a valid source rock? And I think we do. In 2011, Loseth et al., a group of Equinor, well, then Statoil employees, published this amazing paper that has changed the way we work in Spectrum. And the question, it was a very simple question: can hydrocarbon source rocks be identified on seismic data? And it's a very fair question, because we have, as an industry, really focused on just looking at the reservoir and identifying the reservoir and looking for amplitude anomalies associated with the reservoir, which is very fair because after all we want accumulations. But seismic data holds amazing clues and a lot of information on the source rock. And why is that? Because a source rock with kerogen will have a reduction in velocity and density. And what does that mean? A contrast in acoustic impedance. Whatever lithology is overlying a shale will always show you a decrease in acoustic impedance, a high amplitude anomaly. And because the shales and micas are aligned horizontally, you will get an increase in the velocity in the horizontal direction. That gives you an isotropy. So for those of geophysicists in the room, that's an ABO type 4 anomaly dimming in the fire angle stack. Two key indicators, two key criteria that if we find them, we can be pretty certain that we have a source rock. This was tested in the North Sea with a Kimmeridge clay, a world-class source rock. We tested it in Namibia because we have up to 12 wells that have encountered the Aptian source rock. 3 drilled by HRT in the deeper water. You may notice a sort of low amplitude, low frequency, transparent sequence there, which looks a little bit similar to the one I showed you in Somalia. That is the Aptian source rock that has been drilled by wells. And here are all the criteria working in Namibia. So we used Namibia as a test, as a proof of concept before we went to Somalia. If I came to Somalia and I showed you, oh, we carried this out in Somalia, you would probably say to me, well, but you don't have any wells. How do you know that what worked in the North Sea is going to work in Somalia? But we went to Namibia, proved the concept. It works there. You've got the low frequency zone. You've got all the criteria. And then we came to Somalia. That source rock that I showed you, that would be equivalent to the Orandab source rock, that mid-Jurassic source rock, or late Jurassic source rock, sorry, meets the criteria. Look at the top of the source rock. The top of the source rock is a reduction in acoustic impedance. This is SEG negative polarity, so a black is a peak, it's a soft kick, sorry to confuse those who use American polarity. And you see at the base, we have the expected response. It's an increase in acoustic impedance. You see there, so it meets the first criteria. Now we look at the amplitude with variation with angle. So that's the near angle stack on your left. That's a Farmajo stack on your right. And you'll see the arrows are pointing to the source rock. And you see how the amplitude dims in the Farmajo stack. So this is just by sight. But I'm going to show you, we have done our full, complete AVO analysis. And you can see there that you've got the background, and you've got this very clear trend right here, which is the source rock, and that's your AVO type 4 anomaly. So 2 of the criteria have been met. This is looking like a very good quality source rock, because you need good quality, you need keratin in the source rock, otherwise you don't get this response. And then the third, a really interesting one, again from the LOSEF paper, is that a change in amplitude will actually indicate a change in TOC. And look at this is great, because you've got lower amplitude in the relatively shallower section. And when you get into the deeper section, which is where you would expect a higher source rock accumulation and higher organic content, you've got higher amplitude. So that fits in perfectly with what we would expect. So it seems to be a good indicator also of where is my region. And look at the frequency. The frequency is also a low frequency zone. We have a source rock here that is meeting all the criteria that has been proven in the North Sea and in Namibia, and it also makes sense. So we believe that we have a very strong case for some very good source rocks. So what we did is, in collaboration with Leeds University, we carried out a very detailed basin modeling. Now this basin modeling, I haven't shown you everything we've done in Somalia, but we have actually looked at cross-cell architecture, have divided up the whole of the basin, the offshore, into different cross-cell architectures, and we have taken those into account, and we have looked at sediment overburden. We've done the basin modeling through time. Here, for a couple of source rocks, a pre-rift and syn-rift source rock, and we are not using